Hello everyone, and welcome back to another session of me reading The Hobbit by JRR Tolkien. Now this session we are going to go through chapter 10, and it's a relatively short chapter, only about 10 pages, so I'll be able to get through it in this whole session. And besides chapter 12, which I will be splitting up into two chapters, two sessions, the rest of our chapters are relatively short, under 10 pages. So it'll be pretty easy on the rest of the way out, and I'm really working hard to get all of the videos out by the end of the school year, so May 21st. And I don't know if you guys are watching this in any particular order, but if you are, happy Friday and happy first day of May. It seems kind of crazy that we've already been doing all this quarantine and stay at home and social distancing and all this stuff for 2 months. It feels kind of like forever, but then also not. It's only May of 2020, and it really does feel like it's been a long time, at least to me. Maybe it hasn't been for you guys. So, as you guys remember, in the last time that we met reading chapter 9, our party, they were in the barrels, and Bilbo was able to help guide them down to where they were ashore. And he had to go hide because he was so cold and he was sneezing and everything. But he doesn't know if everything's okay with the dwarves right now, because he kind of had to hide so that he wouldn't get caught. So, Chapter 10 is called A Warm Welcome, and they are going to be going into Lake Town. And before I start reading, I am going to show you this picture that was in the book of Lake Town. So that's kind of the artist's description of Lake Town. If you guys have seen the movie, this is actually one of the ways that they built it. Basically, it's a town that's in the middle of a lake, and it's built kind of on stilts, kind of has a Venetian kind of feel to it because of the fact that it is in water. And as you guys remember, I'll put the map in the comments again, but I did say that Lake Town was the closest settlement to the Lonely Mountain. A lot of people, if anybody did survive what happened in Dale, which was right next to the Lonely Mountain, they moved over to Lake Town. And Lake Town is the closest settlement, it looks like, to the Elven King's realm. So they get their goods back and forth, and the river was how they did that. So I'm going to jump right into chapter 10. The day grew lighter and warmer as they floated along. After a while, the river rounded a steep shoulder of land that came down upon their left. Under its rocky feet, like an inland cliff, the deepest stream had flowed, lapping and bubbling. Suddenly the cliff fell away, the shore sank, the trees ended, and then Bilbo saw a sight. The lands opened wide about him, filled with the waters in the river, which broke up and wandered in 100 winding courses, or halted in marshes and pools dotted along the isle on every side. But still a strong water flowed on steadily through the midst. And far away, its dark head torn in a cloud, there loomed the mountain, its nearest neighbor to the northeast, and it tumbled land that joined into it that could not be seen. All alone it rose and looked across the marshes to the forest, the Lonely Mountain. Bilbo had come far and through many adventures to see it, and now he did not like the look of it at the least. As he listened to the talk of the raftmen and pieced together the scraps of information they let fall, he soon realized he was very fortunate to have ever seen it at all, even from this distance. Dreary as it had been in his imprisonment, and unpleasant as was his position, to say nothing of the poor dwarves underneath him, still he had been more lucky than he had guessed. The talk was all of the trade that came and went in the waterways, and the growth of traffic on the river as the roads of the east towards Mirkwood vanished or fell into disuse, and of the bickerings of the lakemen and the wood elves about the upkeep of the forest river and the care of the banks. Those lands had changed much in the days when the dwarves dwelled in the mountain, days which most people now remember only as a very shadowy tradition. They had changed even in recent years, and since the last news that Gandalf had had from them. Great floods and rains had swollen the waters that flowed out of the east, and there had been an earthquake or two, which some were inclined to attribute to the dragon, alluding to him chiefly with a curse and an ominous nod in the direction of the mountain. The marshes and bogs that had spread wider on either side, paths had vanished, and many a rider and wanderer too, if they had tried to find the lost way across. The elf road through the wood, which the dwarves had followed on the advice of Beorn, now came to a doubtful and little-used end of the eastern edge of the forest. Only the river offered any longer a safe way from the skirts of Mirkwood to the north in the mountain shadow, plains beyond, and the river was guarded by the Wood Elves' king. So as you can see, Bilbo had come to the end of the day by the only road that was any good. It might have been some comfort to Mr. Baggins, shivering on the barrels, if he had known that the news of this had reached Gandalf far away and given him great anxiety, and that he was in fact finishing his other business, which does not come into this tale, and getting ready to come search of Thorin's company. But Bilbo did not know this. Now, as I mentioned a couple sessions ago, in the movie of The Hobbit, we kind of see where Gandalf goes a little bit more. He goes down south and sees the necromancer. Radagast the Brown is in it. He kind of meets up with Gandalf for a little bit, and he has some adventures, but a lot of these adventures are not told in this tale, nor are they told in Lord of the Rings. I mentioned it before, but Tolkien has a lot of appendices that were at the end of Lord of the Rings. He also has Tales of Middle-earth. His son has compiled and distributed many other stories. They do talk about the fall of Gondolin in this. Christopher Tolkien actually released The Fall of Gondolin either last year or the year before, prior to his death. So there's a lot of stories in Middle-earth that are not encompassed in just Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. So it's something that if you're ever interested in, go look it up. There's a wealth of treasure in Middle-earth. All he knew was that the river seemed to go on and on and on forever, and he was hungry, and he had a nasty cold in the nose, and he did not like the way the mountains seemed to frown at him and threaten him as he drew ever nearer. After a while, however, the river took a more southerly course, and the mountain receded at last, and at last, late in the day, the shores grew rocky, and the river gathered its wandering shores together to a deep and rapid flood, and then they swept along at great speed. The sun had set when turning with another sweep towards the east, and the forest river rushed to the long lake. There it had a wide mouth with stony cliff-like gates at either side, whose feet were piled with shingles. The long lake. Bilbo had never imagined that any water that was not the sea could be so big. It was so wide that the opposite shores looked small and far, but it was so long that its northerly end, which pointed towards the mountain, could not be seen at all. Only from the map did Bilbo know the way up there, where the stars of the Wain were already twinkling, and the running river came down the lake from Dale, and the forest river filled with deep waters that must have once been a great deep rocky valley. At the southern end, the doubled waters poured out again over high waterfalls and ran away hurriedly to the unknown lands. In the still evening air, the noise of the falls could be heard like a distant roar. Not far from the mouth of the forest river was the strange town he had heard the elves speak of in the king's cellars. It was not built on the shore, though there were a few huts and buildings there, but right out on the middle of the surface of the lake, protected from the swirl of the entering river by a promontory of rock which formed a huge calm bay. The great bridge, made of wood, ran out to where on huge piles, made of forest trees, was built a busy wooden town, not a town of elves, but of men, who still dared to dwell under the shadow of the distant Dragon Mountain. Still they throve on the trade that came from the great river of the south, and that was carted past the falls of their town. But in the great days of old, when Dale in the north was rich and prosperous, they had been wealthy and powerful, and they had fleets of boats on the water, and some were filled with gold, and some with warriors and armor. And there had been wars and deeds which were now only legends. The rotting piles of the greater town could still be seen along the shore, where the water sank into a drought. But the men remembered little of all that, though some still sang of the old songs of the Dwarf King, of Mountain, Thror and Thrain, and the race of Durin, and all the coming of the dragons, and the fall of the lords of Dale. Some sang songs, too, that Thror and Thrain would come back one day, and that gold would flow in the rivers, through the mountain gates, and all the land would be filled with new song and laughter. But this pleasant legend did not much affect their daily business. Also, as a reminder, around 100 years have passed since Thorin and all of his company were pushed out of the mountain. So for men, that seems like a lifetime ago. Many of it was legend, but not to dwarves and elves who live longer lives than the race of men. Also, if you guys don't remember, Thror and Thrain of Durin's line are actually Thorin's father. Thror, and Thrain is his grandfather. And he is of the line of Durin. Durin was a great dwarf who lived long ago. As soon as the raft of barrels came into sight, boats rowed out from the piles of town, and voices hailed the raft steerers. Then ropes were cast and oars were pulled, and soon the raft was drawn out of the current of the forest river and towed away around the high shoulder of the rock to the little bay of Lake Town. There it was moored not too far from the shoreward head of the great bridge. Soon men would come up from the south and take some of the casks away, and others would fill the goods that they had brought to take back to the stream up to the wood elves' home. In the meanwhile, the barrels were left afloat, while the elves of the raft and the boatmen went to feast in Lake Town. They would have been surprised if they had seen what had happened by the shore after they had gone and the shades of night had fallen. First of all, a barrel was cut loose by Bilbo and pushed to the shore and opened. Groans came from inside, and out crept a most unhappy dwarf. Wet straw was in his draggled beard, and he was so sore and stiff and bruised and buffeted that he could hardly stand or stumble to the shallow water to lie groaning on the shore. He had been famished and savage, and looked like a dog that had been chained and forgotten in a kennel for a week. It was Thorin, but you could only have told that by his golden chain, and by the color of his now dirty and tattered sky-blue hood, its tarnished silver tassel. It was some time before he would even be polite to the dwarf, or to the hobbit. "Well, are you alive or are you dead?" asked Bilbo quite crossly. Perhaps he had forgotten that he had to have at least one good meal more before speaking to the dwarves, and also the use of his arms and his legs, not to speak of greater allowance of air. "Are you still in prison or are you free? If you want food and you want to go on with this silly adventure, it's yours after all, and not mine. You had better slap your arms together and rub your legs and try to help me get the others out while we still have a chance." Thorin, of course, saw the sense of this, so after a few more groans he got up and helped the hobbit as well as he could. In the darkness, floundering in the cold water, there had been difficult and a very nasty job finding which were the right barrels. Knocking outside and calling only discovered about 6 of the dwarves that could answer. These were unpacked and helped ashore, where they lay muttering and moaning. They were so soaked and bruised and cramped that they could hardly yet realize their release, or be properly thankful for it. Dwalin and Balin were 2 of the most unhappy, and it was no good asking them to help. Bifur and Bofur were less knocked and drier as they lay down, and would do nothing as well. Fili and Kili, however, who were young for dwarves, and had also been packed more neatly with plenty of straw and smaller casks, came out more or less smiling, with only a bruise or 2 and stiffness that would soon wear off. "I hope I never smell of apples again," said Fili. "My tub was full of it. To smell apples everlastingly when you could scarcely move and are cold and sick with hunger is maddening. I could eat anything in the wide world now for hours on end, but not an apple." With the willing help of Kili and Fili, Thorin and Bilbo at last discovered the remainder of the company and got them out. Poor fat Bomber was asleep, or senseless. Dori, Nori, Ori, and Oin, and Gloin were waterlogged and seemed only half alive, and they had to be carried one by one and laid on the shore. "Well, here we are," said Thorin, "and I suppose we ought to thank our stars and Mr. Baggins. I'm sure he had the right to expect it, though I wish it could have been arranged a more comfortable journey. Still, all very much at your service once more, Mr. Baggins. No doubt we shall feel properly grateful when we are fed and recovered. In the meanwhile, what is next?" "I suggest Lake Town," Bilbo said. "What else is there?" Nothing else could, and of course, be suggested. So leaving the others, Thorin and Fili and Kili and the hobbit went along to the shore to the great bridge. There were guards at the head of it, but they were not keeping very careful watch, for it was so long since they had any real need to, except for the occasional squabble of the river trolls. They were friends with the wood elves. Other folks were far away, and some of the younger people in the town openly doubted the existence of any dragon in the mountain, and laughed at the graybeards and gammers who said that they had seen him flying in the sky in their younger days. That being said, it's not so surprising that the guards were drinking and laughing by a fire in their hut, and did not hear the noise of the unpacking of the dwarves or the footsteps of the 4 scouts. Their astonishment was enormous when Thorin Oakenshield stepped through the door. Who are you and what do they want? What do you want? They shouted, leaping to their feet and groping for their weapons. Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, king under the mountain. Oh, you know what? I got that messed up. Thror is Thorin's grandfather, and Thrain is his father. I think I got those kind of mixed up. They all have TH names. I feel like that's not fair to me. Oh well. The dwarf said in a loud voice and looked at it in spite of his torn clothes and draggled hood. The gold gleamed at his neck and his waist, and his eyes were dark and deep. I have come back, and I wish to see the master of your town. Then there was a tremendous excitement. Some of the more foolish ran out of the hut as they expected the mountain to go golden in the night and all the waters of the lake to turn yellow right away. The captain of the guard came forward. Who are these? He said, pointing to Keely and Fili and Bilbo. The sons of my father's daughter, answered Thorin. Fili and Keely, of the race of Durin, and Mr. Baggins, who has traveled with us out of the west. If you come in peace, lay down your arms, said the captain. We have none, said Thorin, and it was true enough. Their knives had been taken out of them by the wood elves, and the great sword Orcris too. Bilbo had his short sword hidden as usual, but that was nothing about that. We have no need of weapons, who return at last to our own as spoken of old, nor could we fight against so many. Take us to your master. He is at feast, said the captain. Then all the more reason to take us to him, burst in Fili, who was getting impatient of these solemnities. We are worn and now famished after our long road, and we have sick comrades. Now make haste and let us have no more words, or your master may have something to say to you. Follow me then, said the captain, with his 6 men. He led them to the bridge, which was through the gates and into the marketplace of the town. There was a wide circle of quiet water surrounded by tall piles in which were built the great houses, by long wooded quays and many steps and ladders going to the surface of the lake. From one great hall shone many lights, and there came sounds of many voices. They passed the doors and stood blinking in the lights, looking at the long tables filled with folk. I am Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, king under the mountain. I return, cried Thorin in a loud voice from the door before the captain could say anything. All leapt to their feet. The master of the town sprang from his great chair, but none rose with greater surprise than the raftmen of the elves, who were sitting at the table of the lower end of the hall. Pressing forward before the master's table, they cried, These are the prisoners of the king that have escaped, wandering vagabond dwarves that could not give any account of themselves, sneaking through the woods and molesting our people. Is this true? Asked the master. As a matter of fact, he thought it more likely than the return of the king under the mountain, if any such person did exist. It is true that we were wrongfully waylaid by the Elven king and imprisoned with a cause as we journeyed back to our lands, answered Thorin. But lock nor bar may hinder the homecoming spoken of old, nor is the town of the wood elves' realm. I speak of the master of the town, of the men of the lake, not to the raftmen of the king, excuse me. Then the master hesitated and looked from one to the other. The Elven king was very powerful in those parts, and the master wished for no You know, sometimes I feel like I just cannot get words out. Do you guys ever have that problem? He doesn't have any quarrel with him. Nor did he think much of old songs, giving him mind to trade and tolls and to cargoes and gold, to which habit he owed to his position. Others were different mind, however, and quickly the matter was settled without him. The news spread from the door like like fire throughout the town. People were shouting and hurrying inside the hall outside of it. The quays were thronged with hurrying feet. Some began to sing snatches of old songs concerning the return of the king under the mountain. That it was Thror's grandson, not Thror himself, that had come back, did not bother them at all. Others took up song, and it rolled loud and high over the lake. The king beneath the mountain, the king of carven stone, the lord of silver foundations, shall come into his own. His crown shall be upholden, his harp shall be restrung, his halls shall echo golden to songs that songs of yore resung. The woods shall wave on the mountains, and the grass beneath the sun. His wealth shall flow in fountains, and the rivers golden run. The streams shall run in gladness, and the lakes shall shine and burn. All sorrow fail and sadness at the mountain king's return. So they sang, or very much like that, only there was a great deal more to it, and there was much shouting as well as the music of harps, and fiddles mixed with it. Indeed, such excitement had not been known in the town in the memory of the oldest grandfather. The wood elves themselves began to wonder greatly and even be afraid. They did not know, of course, that Thorin had escaped or how he had, and they began to think that their king might have made a serious mistake. As for the master, he saw that there was nothing else for it except to obey the general clamor, for the moment at any rate, and to pretend to believe that Thorin was who he said. So he gave up his own great chair and set Fili and Kili beside him in places of honor. Even Bilbo was given a seat at the high table, and no explanation of where he came in, no songs had alluded to him, even the obscurest way, was asked for in the general bustle. Soon afterwards, the other dwarfs were brought into the town amid scenes of astonished enthusiasm. They were all doctored and fed and housed and pampered in the most delightful and satisfactory fashion. A large house was given up to Thorin and his company. Boats and rowers were put on service. And crowds sat and sang songs all day and cheered if any dwarf showed so much as his nose. Some of the songs were the old ones, but some of them were quite new and spoken confidently of the sudden death of the dragon and the cargoes of rich presents coming down the river to Lake Town. These were inspired largely by the master and did not particularly please the dwarves, but in the meantime they were well contented, and they grew fat and strong again. Indeed, within a week they were quite recovered, fitted in fine clothes of proper colors, with beards combed and trimmed, and proud steps. Thorin looked and walked as if his kingdom was already regained, and Smaug was chopped up into little pieces. Now that would be a, don't count your chickens before they hatch kind of situation, right? But he has to act the part too, because it has been so long that people honestly don't think that he's Thorin or Thror or anybody in the Durin's line. So he really has to kind of like fake it till you make it kind of thing. Then, as he said, the dwarves' good feeling towards the Hobbit had grown stronger every day. There were no more groans or grumbles. They drank to his health, and they patted him on the back as they made a great fuss about him, which was just as well, for he was not feeling particularly cheerful. He had not forgotten the look of the mountain, nor the thought of the dragon, and he had beside a shocking cold. For 3 days he sneezed and coughed, and it would not go out, and even after his speeches at banquet were limited to, "Thank you very much." Poor Bilbo, he got so sick. In the meantime, the wood elves had gone back up the forest river to their cargo, and there was great excitement in the king's palace. I have never heard what had happened to the chief of the guards or the butler. Nothing, of course, was ever said about the keys or the barrels while the dwarves stayed in Lake Town, and Bilbo was careful never to become invisible. Still, I dare say, there was more guessed than there was known, though doubtless Mr. Baggins remained a bit of a mystery. In any case, the king knew that the dwarves' errand, or he thought he did, he said to himself. "Very well, we'll see. No treasure will come back through Mirkwood without my having saying something about the matter. But I expect they will come to a bad end and serve themselves right." He at any rate, did not believe in dwarves fighting and killing dragons like Smaug. He strongly suspected attempted burglary or something like that, which shows that he was quite a wise elf, and wiser than most of the men of the town, though not quite right, as we shall see in the end. He sent out his spies to the shores of the lake and as far northward as the mountain as they could go, and they waited. At the end of a fortnight, Thorin began to think of departure. While the enthusiasm still lasted in town, was the time to get help. It would not do to let everything cool down without delay. So he spoke to the master and his counselors, and said that he and his company must soon go towards the mountain. Then, for the first time, the master was surprised and a little frightened, and he wondered if Thorin really, after all, was really a descendant of the old kings. He had never thought that the dwarves had actually dared to approach Smaug, but believed they were frauds who would sooner or later be discovered and turned out. He was wrong. Thorin, of course, really was the grandson of the king under the mountain, and there was no knowing what a dwarf will not dare to do for revenge or recovery of his own. But the master was not sorry to let them go at all. They were expensive to keep, and their arrival had turned things into a long holiday, in which business was at a standstill. Let them go and bother Smaug, and see how he welcomes them, he thought. Certainly, O Thorin, Thrain's son, Thror's son, was what he said. You must claim your own. The hour is at hand, spoken of old. What help can we offer shall be yours, and we trust your gratitude when your kingdom is regained. So one day, though the autumn was now getting far on, and the winds were cold and the leaves were falling fast, 3 large boats left Lake Town laden with rowers, dwarves, Mr. Baggins, and many provisions. Horses and ponies had been sent round by the circuitous paths to meet them at their appointed landing place, and the master and his counselors bade them farewell on the great steps of the town hall that went down to the lake. People sang on the quays out of the windows. The white oars dipped and splashed, and off they went north of the lake on the last stage of their journey. The only person who was unhappy was Bilbo. All right, so we have finished chapter 10, which was a warm welcome. So I did in the last session put in the bottom the differences between the books and the movies. And if you have seen the movie, you'll notice at this junction that between their barrel ride and their imminent arrival in Lake Town, it is quite different. When they're on the river, they're being chased by the orcs, and then you also have Legolas and Tauriel, who have been following them, and then they secretly go into Lake Town. They don't want to get caught. They eventually do, and they kind of have they do have the big procession in which the master allows them to take weapons and go, but they're very secretive about it. They don't want people to know that they're there. So I think that's added to the movie to kind of give a little bit of dramatics. And you guys will see, I'm going to give you a little bit of warning that starting now and towards the end, things are very different in here as opposed to the movie. I don't want to spoil anything, but this is a lot less dramatic than the movies. I love the movies and I love the books, but they are very different. They are not like the descriptions of the depictions of the Lord of the Rings from the movie to the book. But we are done with chapter 10. Next session, we will start on chapter 11, which is called On the Doorstep. So we will see if Thorn and his company, as you can remember, if they can find the key and if they can actually get into the hall, and then what will they do once they actually get in there? Because there's a dragon and there's only 13 or 14 of them. What are they going to do? All right. I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend, and I will see you next week for chapter 11. Bye.